boy. Before you start flaming me just because you read the title of this video, let me just say that The Lord of the Rings is not bad. If I were to say it was bad, I would be a blatant liar. Okay? And second off, this is only on the movies, so anything that you say regarding the books, or how the books are better, or how I should read the books to understand this, blah blah blah, I don't care. It is about the movies and the movies only. And third off, this is entirely opinion-based. If you like Lord of the Rings, go ahead. Like it, read it, watch it, whatever. I'm not going to stop you. But just, I'm going to respect your opinion, so respect mine. Okay? That's all I asked. Lord of the Rings. Yes, it's overrated. It is gigantically overrated. It is praised as the greatest thing ever. It is the most amazing fantasy story of all time. Bullshit. It isn't. It isn't. It's pretty much the first fantasy story of all time. That doesn't make it the best. Matter of fact, a parody webcomic called The Order of the Stick has a much more involving story than Lord of the Rings. It's just full of cliché. It might have made those clichés, but the fact is that even if something creates a cliché, that still falls into that cliché. Let me explain. Super Mario Bros. Invented the cliché of kidnapping the princess as a story. That doesn't mean that the story of kidnapping a cliché isn't cliched when you're playing the game Super Mario Bros. But now that I've been babbling, let me get into some legitimate points of why The Lord of the Rings is overrated. Its story. If you cut away everything extraneous, and I'm talking about everything extraneous, only the bare minimal things to the plot, you basically have two short guys going to drop a MacGuffin ring into a volcano. That's the entire story. Now you're probably shouting out, "Oh, but Aragorn's the king, and then you got Gollum and his craziness." No, none of that's important. The thing is that most of the story is completely unimportant to the plot. More than half of the story is Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas doing crap. And granted, that part of the story is way more interesting than the Frodo and Sam part, but it's not important because the only thing that they do that has anything to do with Frodo and Sam is at the end they distract Sauron so that they can get into the volcano. And really that could have been done by anything else or not even been brought up at all. Okay, and even then, there's a lot of subplots in that story that don't even affect anything. Like, for example, the Eowyn's subplot. All she does is kill the guy at the end, which was pretty cool, but then again, it could have been killed by Aragorn, or by Gimli, or by Legolas, or by anyone else, and it could have still had the same sort of power and dramatic effect. Okay? There's so much extraneous crap that means nothing. The Faramir Boromir thing is just an explanation as to why Gondor is such a shithole at the beginning of Return of the King. Okay? So much extraneous crap is in these stories, and none of it is needed. Okay? Which leads into my second point. These movies are too goddamn long. Okay? This is a complaint that a lot of people have, and I expect that this is the one that isn't going to get as much criticism from you guys as everything else, but these movies are still too goddamn long. Each one is about 4 hours long, give or take. And that is way too long. I'm not sure about you guys, but I don't have the attention span to pay attention for most of these movies. And like I said, so much stuff could have been cut out to make them more manageable. And even still, there are geeks online that say that there's still stuff that they should be brought in. Main example of this is Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil did nothing for the story. Cutting him out was a good idea. Do you got that? Do you got that? Good, you've got it. Okay, good. Okay, back on to legitimate complaints. Next off, we have the acting. And now, none of the acting is really overly bad. Okay, if it was, I'd be lying if I said it was. It isn't. None of it is overly bad. However, a lot of it is cheesy, and a lot of it just isn't as good as it could be. "I can't do it, Sam! It's too strong! The ring!" Elijah Wood's acting in Return of the King was just, it sounded like a little kid dropped his ice cream cone on the sidewalk, okay? It was just whiny, and I know he's supposed to be like struggling with the ring, but it could have been done a lot better. Instead of having him go, "Sam, I can't do it, Sam! Oh no! Wah!" And I could give a ton of other examples, but I'm only going to give one, because otherwise we'd be here all day. In Moria, when Gimli is at his like cousin's grave or whatever, and he starts crying. That scene always seemed really forced to me. I could never take it seriously because it was like, no. I could never take that seriously. And speaking about things that I can't take seriously, another major problem with Lord of the Rings is the villains. Both Sauron and Saruman are really just uncompelling villains. Sauron particularly, he's never given any motivation at all. Except for that, he's evil. No backstory, nothing. He's just said, you're just supposed to believe that he's evil and that he should die. Even if he was evil and should just die, he's still not a threatening villain at all. The only thing that you see him do that's any bit threatening is at the beginning of Fellowship, he's just like knocking down a bunch of soldiers and they die. Okay, but then again you see the trolls do that in Return of the King. So basically all you're saying is that Sauron is basically a troll on a horse. That's it. And they were able to kill the trolls. So basically Sauron is a pretty much empty threat because if you just cut off his finger, he's dead. I just could never take Sauron seriously. Even in his costume, the big spiky helmet and the glowing eyes, it's just, they're trying to make it seem like he's evil. Do you get that? I'm going to hammer it into your head until you realize he's evil, yet he's given no proper motivation and he's not the least bit threatening. And in his eyeball state on the top of the tower, that I just couldn't take that seriously. It's just, it looks silly. It does. It looks silly. It'd be like me putting a foot on the end of a stick. It has the same sort of effect as the eyeball. It's not threatening. Yeah, there's nothing that Sauron has in order to control the orcs. There's no power over them since he's just an eyeball. He doesn't have any sort of power or anything at all that would give him the right to control the orcs. Or Saruman, for that matter. Yeah, and Saruman. Saruman isn't a compelling villain either. The only motivation he's given is, if I don't become evil, I'm going to die too. Which could have worked if he showed a little bit more reluctance. Okay? Part of being a villain has something to do with their motivation, with why they're evil. And Saruman is given at least a decent excuse, but it's never played upon. For example, we know that Saruman and Gandalf were friends. But then again, Saruman is just as willing to throw Gandalf off of the top of the tower without any sort of, like, reluctance for doing so. He says, Gandalf, come join me. We're the winning team. And Gandalf goes, nope. Saruman just says, well then you suck then. If they were really friends, then Saruman would show a lot more reluctance. Okay? He's just a completely unrelatable character. And the fact is that I thought Saruman was the main villain until he died at the beginning of Return of the King. Then again, the fact that Saruman and Sauron are so similar really doesn't have anything to do, really didn't help the matter, but, eh. Okay, so those are pretty much my complaints about The Lord of the Rings, just in general. It's too long, the acting is cheesy at times, most of the stuff is extraneous, and the villains are unrelatable and uncompelling. But if I can just go off topic for a minute here, I want to talk about the Lord of the Rings fanboys, okay? The fanboys consider this to be the greatest fantasy story ever. And it isn't. It's pretty much the first fantasy story ever, but just because something's the first thing ever doesn't mean it's the best. For example, Pong is the first video game ever made, pretty much. But do we consider it to be the best game ever made? No, because it's Pong. It's just doop, doop. And that's a pretty good way to explain Lord of the Rings as well. Two people dropping a MacGuffin into a fire. That's it. So people consider it to be the greatest thing ever. I don't see that. And anything else that even takes place in a fantasy setting is immediately a Lord of the Rings ripoff. The Aragon series is a decent book series, except for the second one. First and third books are decent books to read, but just because they take place in a fantasy setting, they are ripoffs of Lord of the Rings. I don't get that. If they're a ripoff of anything, they're a ripoff of the Star Wars plot. I can't see how they're a ripoff of Lord of the Rings at all, other than there's elves and dwarves and it's in a fantasy setting. That's like saying that every sci-fi flick is a ripoff of Star Trek because it takes place in space. Just because something is similar to something else in certain ways, like for example their setting or characters, doesn't mean it's automatically a complete ripoff, okay? That's like saying the Looney Tunes is a ripoff of Disney just because they're anthropomorphic animals. The Lord of the Rings fanboys need to understand that just because something isn't the Lord of the Rings when it's in a fantasy story doesn't mean it has to be bad or it has to be a ripoff. And these movies aren't the greatest movies ever, and they aren't gold by any means. They're enjoyable action films, and they do have some interesting characters and moments, but then again, most of them are completely unnecessary and extraneous. But anyway, that's why Lord of the Rings is overrated, because, well, as I've explained, there's a lot of problems with them, but that doesn't mean that they're bad, okay? I did enjoy watching them, and they're not bad movies. And the fanboys are a bit overzealous, if... But anyway, yeah. Like I said, this is my opinion. If you don't agree with it, that's fine. Just respect my opinion, I'll respect yours. Anyway, this is ExandShadow. Bye.